Hello, good morning everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I know it's early for many of you on the west side of America. Apologies firstly to anyone that had trouble registering. It's a new system we're using and we're just working out the kinks. We'll do it differently next time so you can select a session, because the way it is at the moment, it just registers you for all of them, but obviously it's not clear how that's done, so we'll change it for next time. But anyway, good morning. Thank you for coming along, joining our second webinar. Hope you're keeping well in these challenging times at the moment, but we'll try and relay some information about Glensound products and what we're doing and where we are as we go through the weeks. Online, we have Gavin Davis, our Managing Director, who's as a guest, but is available in the chat screen, as he's just said hello. And our Engineering Director, Ian Burns, is also with me, and he'll be taking questions at the end for any technical questions, and he's also on the chat. If you have any questions at all, put them in the chat box, in the chat window. Gavin and Ian may address them as we're talking, or we can have a catch up at the end with the outstanding questions. This presentation will be available as well later on, so you will be able to get it as a download or the presentation file to share with your colleagues. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, so the reason we're doing this is we've been having increasing number of requests and projects, active projects, about how remote control of our units work. We don't do IP codecs, but our units are available to be remote controlled, which does give broadcasters options, particularly in the current climate with remote working colleagues, to be able to control the units, not rely on non-technical staff, and for an engineer to have a degree of control, with the control part being separate to the audio, with however you decide to manage the audio part. And this presentation is very much just about detailing how the remote control side will work on a few key Glensound products. Okay, I just need to do a share screen here so we can have a look at my presentation. Okay, and there's some nice video feedback. Right, hopefully everyone can see that okay. And we will go ahead, like I said, just hang on to your questions to the end or stick them in the chat box, and Gavin and Ian may take care of them as we go through. Okay, how to remote control Glensound commentary units. As I said at the start there, this current pandemic situation, we've got more and more people working from home, reporters, and the demands for systems for more professional ways of reporters working from home and being able to have a degree of control from the engineering side has become more and more important. So we're looking at our systems that allow you to have control of the link and the systems. Our systems do allow quite detailed control with key features like microphone levels, how the talkbacks work, and you can get metering as well, real-time metering on the link, just to see how the levels are looking. All the units we're going to look at are Dante based. So in order to use the Dante based systems, first we have to get the audio into the computer. So on Dante, we do this using Dante Virtual Sound Card, VSC, which is a great low-cost application that can add up to 64 in and 64 out onto your PC or Mac, and just present in Excel very helpfully and very easily as multi-channel sound cards in pairs. We use VLC Media Player at Glensound for testing, And as you can see there in audio, if you go to the audio device to select the device, if you're using Dante Virtual Sound Card, you have options of where you would like your audio to go in pairs. And we have 8 options there because I've had it set to the 16 channel mode. But once it's available as a sound card connection, whatever application you're using on your computer, you're then able to assign it and use the audio. So just through using Dante Virtual Sound Card, we will have the audio on the PC or Mac and be able to be used. Very simple. We just need a network link for a switch, a router, to our device. Just be aware that if the switch is not PoE, you will need to have local power on our INFERNO that we have there, or our other devices will need local power if there's no power over Ethernet available on the router or the switch. And if your computer does not have an Ethernet port, as many don't, then you need to use a USB to Ethernet adapter. Again, very low cost, an easy way just to connect a laptop onto the wired network with the switch and router. This is just a grab of the Dante website, the Ordinate website, just showing that a license for Dante Virtual Sound Card is $30. They're not an expensive application and gives you lots of options on the computer. So using Dante Virtual Sound Card, we now have the audio on the computer very simply with our devices, and we have 2 control systems. One is web server based and one is a Windows 10 app. And we will look at both of these now in terms of how you would set them up and what they would offer you on the devices. So these are the 2 units for web browser control that have inbuilt web servers, the INFERNO and MINFERNO. The INFERNO is like the parent device, if you like. The MINFERNO is the slimmed down version. Internally, the operations of them are essentially the same. The remote control's the same. The MINFERNO is obviously a much smaller device with fewer controls. And you have an option of whether you need the smaller basic unit or the more comprehensive larger unit in the INFERNO, although the INFERNO itself is a relatively small box. So the INFERNO, the main unit, it's a Dante AES67 announcers sportscasters unit. It's a single mic line connection with phantom power and our referee compressor, which manages the audio input levels very nicely. Is a nice gentle compression as we start heading towards clipping, and the ratio gets higher and higher as we approach clipping, just to make sure the mic doesn't clip, but without affecting the dynamics of the input. So it's specifically designed for a commentary environment where there may be shouting reporters. You have 7 talkback outputs that go out onto the Dante network. We can take 7 inputs from the Dante network onto our headphone mixer, and the pots there are the inputs from the Dante network, and that's the headphone mixer for the user to set their own mix levels of the incoming audios. Directors, coordinators, stats guys, whoever it is coming in, they can set their own mix in their headphones, and they can pan that from left ear, right ear, or both ears per input as they require at different volume levels, with side tone, which is their own voice. So they can have the mix exactly as they like it. MINFERNO is exactly the same, just with much fewer controls available. I think I'm right in saying from 0 to 3 talkback circuits, actually. If you need fewer buttons, we can have it with fewer buttons, but that's the MINFERNO 3 there, shown with 3 talkback circuits and 3 returns for the headphone mix from Dante. The back panel of both units is the same. Has a fully redundant interface with a primary and secondary copper and a primary and secondary SFP module for fiber links. It will run on PoE, but we also have an internal switch mode AC power supply, and a DC input. So it's very well covered in terms of redundancy for the network connections and power. So the web browser control for the Inferno and Minferno, basically we need to install VSC onto the PC, connect the Inferno on the network, and point a web browser to the IP address of the Inferno. In the basic overview, that's what we need to do. But we need to set up a few things first. Importantly, with our devices, the remote control stream that we use is a separate IP address from the audio transport stream. So that allows us to set up this distant connection method for remote control, which is separate to the IP address that Dante is using. So it's an important distinction that the IP addresses for the audio and our control are two separate IP addresses. So we need to set up a static IP address. This is the configuration screen, the network menu of the Inferno that you're looking at. We need to set static IP address on this internal web server of the Inferno. You can see there we've got put in a fixed local IP 192.168.0.181. You connect to the Inferno via a local web browser on the local network that it's connected to, and we just go to this configuration page. We need to make sure that the DHCP server is off, so that box needs to be unticked. The enable DHCP server, this needs to be unticked, and then we use this fixed IP address here, which we use in 181, but obviously any local IP address that's not being used. Then we need port forwarding on the router that the Inferno is connected to. So this is just a typical configuration screen from our router that's showing the port redirection and forwarding that we're using. So in this router administration screen, we need to set a public unused port. This could be any public port available. We've used 50050 as our example here that we put in as a public port, and we've redirected this to the local port 80. So we are setting up the port forwarding on our router that the Inferno is connected to. In the router administration screen, we now need to set the source IP as the remote user's public IP address. You can check that at whatsmyipaddress.com. Your users can check that to find the IP address. We need to put in the public IP address. This limits the traffic from the internet to this address only. So we won't be enabling any other communication except from this IP address. The source IP of the remote user's public IP address. This port we redirect to the local static IP address of the Inferno, which we set at 181, 192.168.0.181. Obviously, the source IP on that graphic, it shows Mark IP phone because that's my office phone working at home at the moment. And that would be the source IP. So we have that now. So we need to remote access to the web server now. Need to check the public IP address of the location that the Inferno is located. Where's my IP address? And we use this IP address in the web browser, followed by the colon and the public port number, as I'm sure you're aware. You can see, and maybe you can make out in the top bar of the web screen, I've taken a snapshot of there, 5152.131.90 at port 50050. You put that into an internet browser, and if you set the unit up as we've described, you will see this screen, which is the first screen for control on an Inferno or a Minferno. So this remote control allows us to do quite a few different things, as well as give you lots of description as well. Hopefully there's lots of text on here telling you what everything does. But you can see we have a meter bar at the top. If there was audio there, that meter bar would be moving. But in current firmware, we can disable that. We have a large on-air button. You can change the input gains up and down. And as well as you being able to do that remotely yourself, if the user turns their mic on and off, you will see that from this side as well, what they're controlling. We can also change the input type. You can turn phantom power on and off. And importantly, we can lock the controls of the Inferno or Minferno. So you can set the unit up as you want, and you can lock it so that they can't turn their on-air button on and off. You can lock the gain control as you wish. In a separate screen here, we are able to change the configuration of all the push buttons on the unit in terms of the mode they work. All of our buttons traditionally are configurable to be push to talk momentary buttons. You can set them as latching, or we have an intelligent mode where a quick press is a latch and a longer press acts as a momentary push to talk. You can change your on-air button to be a latching on-off, or you can have it permanently on, and when you push it down, hold it down, it's a cough button. And we can change the headphone switching if you want the switching to be left, right, or both. You can see on the graphic there, the configuration, you've got quite comprehensive control of how all of the button configuration works. There's also a screen to set the relationships that pressing one button has on another. So, for example, if you press a talkback button, generally you would mute the on-air button as a standard. But you can change all of the ways that the buttons interact and whether they come back on when you let them go or not. You can set up all of the interoperation relationships on this screen. So that was the Minferno using the system we described there. Then we have the web server. Then we have Glensound Controller, which is our Windows 10 app. It's a remote control for PCs using Windows 10. And there's two key units that this will control in this method, the PARADISO and the PARADISO Lite. Differences between these two units, you can just about make out. On the left there, we have e-paper screens. And on the one on the right, there are no e-paper screens. There are just scribble pads. And on the back of the PARADISO, you have copper and fiber connections, but the PARADISO Lite is copper Ethernet connections only. Still primary redundant, but just copper Ethernet only. But that's the only two differences between the two units. But the PARADISO Lite is significantly lower cost. They're 3 user units for 3 commentators or announcers with a very, very comprehensive feature set. But the actual look of the unit and the way it operates from the user's point of view, they'll be very familiar and comfortable in using, as they'll have used, may well have used our other units, and it operates in a very similar way. Again, we have very high quality microphone amplifiers. If you've used our units or you have these at the moment, you know we have exceptional quality microphone amplifiers, again with our referee compressor limiter system on to make sure we don't get any clipping. And you can adjust front panel gain there, which can be locked or remote controlled, of course. We have a full set of controls for each commentator, 4 talkback outputs, 8 inputs into the headphone mixer with left, right, both switching. So I doubt a commentator would typically need more than about 8 sources for them to set their own mix. So they've got plenty of options there, and 4 output talkback circuits. And the electronic screens there on the PARADISO, fully configurable. You can name them, put the commentators' names in, the announcers' names, and you can see at a glance the level of that channel and the pan position. The mark at the bottom shows you that as well. So a bit of extra information when you have the screens. On the rear panel there, you can see we have the primary and secondary copper Ethernet. We have the primary and secondary fiber connections, and you have five local inputs and outputs, analog, directly on the back of the Paradiso, which can all be configured and used via Glen Controller, as we will look at in a moment, with configurable GPIO, mains power supply, external DC, or the whole unit will work on PoE from the switch as well. As I mentioned, the Paradiso Lite, it's the same unit operationally, just without the screens and with copper Ethernet links on the back. It's about a third less than the Paradiso price-wise, but we sell about both equally, so they're still both popular. They're about as popular as each other. So now we're going to look at how we would use Glen Controller to remote control these units. We're going to set up a VPN between the Paradiso and the remote location, install Glen Controller, and set Glen Controller to the fixed IP mode. So fairly straightforward when we're doing remote control on the using Glen Controller and the Paradiso. In Windows 10, to set up a VPN, there's a very nice built-in system. If you type VPN in your search box, you will find the VPN connection section, and we can use the Windows built-in VPN on the machine that Glen Controller will be on to the router that the Paradiso is connected to. You need on this screen, obviously, to add the credentials required to connect to the remote router, the addresses that you will have for that remote router you will put in here to set up your VPN. On the Paradiso, we need a static IP address assigned in Dante Controller. This says Inferno on here, but this is just a screen just to show you that in the network config section of the device in Dante Controller, you see you can set there, manually configure an IP address, and you can put then a static IP address in for the Paradiso that we're going to control. Remember that Glen Controller is only available for PC on Windows 10. We use some of the functions of Windows 10, so it is just a Windows 10 application. You can download it directly from the Glensound website. The link information is there in the Dante section under Glen Controller, and you can access that at glensound.com. So when we run Glensound Controller, in the main settings, we need to set static IP. So if we go to the discovery method, we set it to static IP list only with a static list enabled. And you can see there we have an add option now, which allows us to add the static IP address of the Paradiso to be controlled, which will be the IP address that we've just put in Dante Controller. So this will give us remote control of this device now across a VPN. You have a lot of functions and a lot of control when you use Glensound Controller for a Paradiso, as well as all the real-time monitoring of all of the top panel functions. So you will see the pots move if they're adjusting the headphone pots up and down. You'll see the buttons coming on and off, and you'll see the meter move if we have audio present. So it's all real-time, and of course you can control that. You can, if the user's having problems, they can't hear their director properly, you can look and say you haven't got it turned up, and you can turn it up. So you have full control over the top panel, as well as, importantly, of course, the input type, and at the bottom there we have the gain adjust. You can remote control the gain of each of the microphones simply on this screen. You can also, in Glensound Controller, have very comprehensive configuration of how all of the pots and buttons work, whether they work to full range or to a dim, which is a lower level so they can't turn it off, whether buttons are always on, always off, in a push-to-talk mode, an intelligent mode, or they latch on and off. You can see there we can completely set that per button and per pot. This is the most interesting screen because this is the mixer that's part of the Paradiso and Glen controller. It's a 32 by 32 Dante mixer plus the local I/O of the Paradiso. And the Paradiso has 6 analog inputs and outputs, 2 digital AES3 channels in and out, 3 microphones and 3 headphone connections. We can create a mix of any of those. And the most interesting example of that, the typical one, would be you're sending your users international sound, the stadium effects, because they want to monitor that. But we can create a mix. So if we look here, across the bottom, we have the inputs into the mixer. And on the right-hand side, we have the output channel. So on the right, you can see here we've got Dante channel 14 is selected. So that's our output. And on Dante output 14, you just click on the bottom to add it to the mix, and then you can adjust the levels. You see we have 3 microphones there, all set at -15 dB. And we've added to that Dante input channel 12, which is our international sound. And we can now send that as a mix back into the Dante network on Dante channel 14. So that gives us very powerful control as a mixer, an engineering-based mixer that's all part of Glensound controller when you're controlling a Paradiso. We could spend a lot of time looking at this, but just to give you an idea that there's a lot of options there, and we're happy to take questions on that afterwards or look at this in more detail another time if you'd like to look into the mixer configuration of the Paradiso. So the audio transport options, we're just talking about remote controls here. If you're using a local or a wide area network, obviously it's desirable to keep it on Dante. If you can keep it on Dante, that will give you the best options, the maximum flexibility. We've had some good examples of wide area networks in the UK. We have a dark fiber wide area network across all of the Premiership soccer grounds. I forget the exact distance, but the northernmost soccer ground to the southernmost is 600-700 miles. And there are 20 Premiership soccer grounds all on a dark fiber network using our Dante devices. So that would be perfect for plugging into to use. So that's a preferable option, a local or a wide network. If you can't do that, obviously, then we need to use IP coding of some description. Hardware IP codecs are the traditional method used, of which there are many available. You can use software-based devices like Lucy Live, which has been around for some time. There are web-based systems that offer a pay-per-use, a very simple user package, and that are quite easy to use actually with IP DTL. As a connection, works quite well. And we're seeing more and more 3 major projects at the moment that are all using Unity Connect software on an Apple Mac, which is not particularly expensive and gives you 64 inputs and 64 outputs, which can match the capacity of your Dante virtual sound card if you wish. It's an Apple Mac software, but we have customers using that with a PC emulator for Glen controller. To give you an idea of your audio transport options to go along with our remote control of the devices. So that's our short presentation, just an overview of how our remote control functions work. While I've been doing this presentation, I've not been able to see the other screen because the presentation takes over. So I will go back to that now and stop my screen sharing. And Ian Burns, our engineering director, will join us. And if you have a question, if you'd like to put it in the chat window, we will do our best to to answer your questions. So hopefully Ian will join us soon. Let me have a look. Oh, hi Ian.
Hello.
Hopefully my audio will stay on this time. The audio went a bit funny on the earlier presentation.
Okay.
So we had a question there from Matt. We've answered Matt, have we?
Answer the first question. So the for the user interface, the protocol for the web interface on the Inferno and the Minferno is fairly straightforward. And if you wanted to write your own script to interface with the web server, that's actually quite easy, and we can provide the information for you to do that. Slightly more complex if you wanted to do it for the Paradiso. Again, we've documented the protocol for the data that passes between the Paradiso and Glen Controller, and we can provide that on request.
Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, if you could put them in the chat window, if you could, we'll do our best to answer them. I'm not sure there'll be many more coming. This presentation will be available afterwards if you wish to share it. And of course, please get back to us at any time if you have any questions. I'm mark.wilson@glensound.co.uk. I will filter everything for you. But it looks like that's going to be about it. Oh, we've got one more question in. Ian.
Yes, it is using WebSockets. Of course.
Interesting. I'm not sure who Gavin is. Maybe Gavin's a very important user in the world of broadcast who wants to know that. We believe they are. We believe they are, Gavin, yes. If there are better ways to do them, we're forever trying to improve and find out. So we believe that we do a very good job. Thank you, George. Okay, I think that will bring our presentation to an end. So thank you everyone for joining us. We'll keep in touch for any further presentations we have coming up with any of our forthcoming product launches. And I said, if you have any questions following this, you can get me at mark.wilson@glensound.co.uk, which I can share with Ian for any of the deep tech questions. So for now, thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you a good day. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ian. Bye-bye.